He built his life to control everything. But tonight, his maid was holding his children like they were hers, because when they cried out, sick and alone, he never answered. Two tiny boys, wrapped against her chest like a lifeline, while the man they belonged to stood frozen in his own home. The elevator doors whispered open into the private Atlanta penthouse, polished, pristine, and cold. Michael Davies stepped inside, luggage still in hand, the scent of jet fuel clinging to his suit. He hadn't told a soul he was coming back early. He never did. Because control wasn't something he shared, it was something he enforced. And tonight, he just wanted silence, stillness, the order he'd built his empire on. But from the kitchen, a sound interrupted everything. A lullaby, soft, hummed, followed by the gentle coo of babies. Michael's brow furrowed. His penthouse was supposed to be empty, cleaned, maintained, not lived in. He dropped his bag and moved toward the kitchen, each step sharper than the last. And there, under the soft track lights and skyline reflection, stood Angela Chapman, 27 years old, orange uniform, yellow gloves still on, and strapped to her chest were his sons, Matt and Max, 2 years old, sleeping, breathing unevenly, one of them burning with a fever. Michael stopped cold, his voice cut through the room like glass. "What the hell is this?" Angela didn't jump, didn't apologize. She just looked up. They were sick. The nanny left. They wouldn't stop crying. Her tone was even, but her eyes, they carried hours of exhaustion and something more, conviction. Michael stared at her, at his sons, trying to process the scene in front of him. The sling, the closeness, the quiet breathing against her heart. He hadn't touched them in days, hadn't known they were ill, hadn't even checked. Everything about this was wrong. His rules, his boundaries, shattered. She wasn't family, she wasn't supposed to hold them. And yet, they looked safe, calmer than he'd seen them in weeks, held. For a moment, barely a breath, something stirred deep inside him. A flash. Of fevered nights in his own childhood, of calling for help in a house full of people, and no one coming. He swallowed hard, but the knot in his throat didn't move. Angela stood in front of him, not defiant, not afraid, just present, and holding the two most fragile parts of his life, like someone who'd already chosen to care when he hadn't. But before we begin, tap that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you that real love doesn't need permission. It just shows up. He hadn't meant to come home tonight. The Zurich deal closed early. The jet was already waiting, and for once he didn't feel like smiling for cameras in Paris. Michael Davies just wanted quiet. Instead, he walked into a storm he didn't see coming. Angela stood completely still. The babies were tucked tight against her. Sweat dampened their curls, their cheeks flushed with fever. Michael's voice came again, lower now, but no less sharp. "Where's the nanny?" Angela didn't blink. Gone. Walked out. No note. Just left. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. His eyes flicked to the boys. One of them whimpered in his sleep. Angela shifted her stance to cradle him. Michael's hands curled into fists. "You weren't hired to play mother," he said. "No," she replied. "I was hired to clean floors, but I found them screaming, burning up, alone." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just said the truth out loud. And it landed harder than a scream ever could. Michael moved past her and into the nursery. He flicked on the light. It was a mess. Half-eaten baby food, unopened medicine, a monitor blinking red. The nanny's phone still charging in the corner. No explanation, no plan. Just absence. He turned slowly, jaw tight. "You should have called me." Angela stepped into the doorway, still holding the boys. "I did, 3 times. Left voicemails. No response." He looked away, the weight of it settling in. Silence stretched thin between them. Only the sound of Max's soft breath broke through. Angela rocked slightly, instinctively. Michael noticed how the child relaxed into her without hesitation, without fear. That trust, it wasn't built overnight, and he had no idea when it began, or worse, how long it had taken to form without him. "You had no right to touch them," he said, barely above a whisper. Angela's grip didn't loosen. "They needed to be held." Her voice cracked, just for a moment. "I wasn't thinking about rights, Mr. Davies. I was thinking about fevers and silence and what it means to cry with no one coming." That last line hit deeper than she probably intended, because he remembered it too, being 5 years old, curled up in a cold room, body burning, calling for his father, and only hearing the echo of his own voice. Michael cleared his throat, straightened his spine. The warmth rising in his chest felt foreign and dangerous. Angela stepped forward, slow, careful. "If you're going to fire me," she said quietly, "do it now, but just know I didn't hold them to overstep. I held them because someone had to." Matt stirred. Tiny fingers curled around the collar of her uniform. Angela glanced down, didn't flinch, didn't ask for forgiveness. Michael looked at the boy's hand, then back at her, and for a breathless second, the room held still. He didn't fire her. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out. The door didn't slam. It clicked softly shut, but it echoed like thunder down the hall. Michael didn't sleep, not because of noise, but because of silence, a silence that echoed louder than any argument. He stood in the dark hallway outside the nursery, listening to their breaths, to hers, and to the voice in his head saying, "You weren't there." By morning, the twins were quieter. Their fever had dropped slightly. Angela hadn't left. She was in the kitchen when he entered, still in uniform, hair pulled back, yellow gloves tossed on the counter beside a bottle of children's ibuprofen. She didn't greet him, didn't even look up. "You should have told me sooner," he said. Angela turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I did. You didn't pick up." Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came after too many nights of doing everything alone. Michael pulled a chair back from the table, sat. "Where's the nanny now?" Angela didn't move. "She quit, left a voicemail, said she couldn't handle the crying, said it wasn't worth being ignored every day." She reached into the drawer and slid her phone across the counter. The voicemail was still there. Michael didn't play it, he just stared at the screen and for a moment didn't know what to say. Angela stepped closer. "I found them soaked in sweat, Mr. Davies, screaming. Their diapers hadn't been changed in hours. The monitor was on mute. The nanny's things were packed before she left." Her voice didn't rise, but her eyes burned. "I didn't know what else to do. I held them." Michael looked down at his hands. The same ones that signed billion-dollar contracts, built towers, restructured companies with a pen stroke, hands that hadn't held his sons in over a week. "You should have waited," he said. Angela's mouth twitched, not a smile, something colder. She stepped around the counter slowly until they were eye to eye. "Would you have preferred I left them there, shaking, screaming, burning up while I polished your counters?" Her voice didn't crack, but his resolve did. He stood quickly, like he needed to shift the power back into his posture. "You crossed a line." "No," she said quietly. "I stepped in when no one else did." A long silence followed, the kind that made every breath feel like a choice. Michael turned away, walked to the window. Midtown Atlanta shimmered beyond the glass, orderly, towering, obedient, his city, but not his home, not anymore. Angela's voice came softly from behind him. "I don't need to stay. I came to get my things. I'll go after that." He didn't turn around, didn't stop her. And yet, he heard Matt's cry from the nursery, high-pitched, frantic. Angela was already moving before Michael could react. Her footsteps down the hall were soft, familiar, like she'd done it before, like she knew the way. He stayed where he was, motionless, silent, staring out over the skyline he owned and feeling something new, not anger, not power, something quieter and harder to name. Angela didn't wait for permission. She packed her things in silence. A small duffel, neatly zipped, the uniform folded, her shoes placed side by side at the door. She didn't ask if she was fired. She already knew. Michael stood in the hallway watching her through the open kitchen archway. He wanted to say something. He didn't know what. Not thank you, not sorry, not stay. Words were easy in boardrooms, not here. The twins had fallen back asleep. A nurse was scheduled to arrive by noon. The house would be clean again, quiet again, just the way he liked it. So why did it all feel wrong? Angela zipped the bag shut. Still no eye contact, still no plea. Just a woman with a steady back, doing what needed to be done. Again. Michael stepped forward, but his voice stayed behind. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was crowded, with everything he hadn't done, everything she had. Angela finally turned. You don't have to explain. Her tone wasn't bitter, just tired. You hired me to clean, not to care. I understand. He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptible. That's not what this is. She raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Not yet. Angela lifted her bag, walked past him, paused at the nursery door, looked in one last time. Matt shifted in his sleep. She lingered, just a moment, then started down the hall. Michael watched her walk away, and something in his chest moved, a slow ache, like grief, but older, like it had been waiting. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he saw it again. A different hallway, marble floors, echoes of footsteps too far away. A little boy with a fever, crying into a pillow, hoping the maid would come check on him. She never did, because she wasn't allowed. He opened his eyes. Angela was at the door now, hand on the knob. She didn't turn it yet. You were right, he said quietly. She paused, still didn't look back. About what? Michael swallowed. His voice came out softer than he expected. About waiting, about crying and no one showing up. I know what that feels like. Angela turned then, slowly, her expression unreadable. But her eyes saw something he wasn't ready to show. Then maybe you understand why I did what I did. Michael nodded once, just once. But it said more than anything he'd said in days. Angela looked down, the duffel bag strap still in her hand, still unsure. She didn't move. Neither did he. The moment stretched, uncomfortable, unfinished, but not broken. And somewhere down the hallway, a baby stirred again. A soft, fragile sound, searching for something that felt like home. The door never opened. Angela stood there for a long time, hand still on the knob, her bag by her side. She didn't move, and neither did he. Michael didn't speak right away, didn't rush to explain himself, didn't offer forgiveness. What he offered was something rarer. Space. Finally, he cleared his throat. Sit down. Not an order, not a command. Just words, carried with something unfamiliar. Respect. Angela hesitated, then let go of the doorknob, walked slowly back to the kitchen, dropped her bag beside the counter, and sat. The room was still, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustle of wind against the windows. Michael leaned against the counter, arms folded. Then finally he asked, "Why are you still here?" Angela met his eyes. "Because I don't walk out on people who need me." Her voice was steady, measured, but her hands, she kept them clasped tightly in her lap. Michael nodded once, then sank into the chair across from her. The silence stretched again, but this time it didn't feel hostile. It felt necessary. He tilted his head slightly. "Where are you from?" Angela blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Haven't been asked that in a while." Michael waited. She exhaled slowly, like she wasn't sure where to begin. Small town outside Macon, dirt roads, one stoplight. My mom worked night shifts at the diner, then cleaned houses during the day. She paused. I was the oldest, so when my siblings got sick, I stayed home. Learned how to sponge fevers before I learned algebra. Michael's eyes softened. Angela continued, voice quieter now. Got a scholarship to Clark Atlanta. Made it halfway through before my mom's kidneys started to fail. She couldn't work. I dropped out. Took every job I could find. She looked down at her hands. Cleaning was the only thing I didn't need a degree for. Michael swallowed but said nothing. Angela glanced at him. People think being a maid is just mops and bleach, but sometimes it's holding a child who won't stop crying, or staying late so the mother can cry alone in her room without guilt. She looked away again. It's not just floors, Mr. Davies. It's knowing how to be invisible, and when not to be. Michael stared at her for a long time. This woman, who he'd barely noticed for months, had lived 1,000 quiet battles behind that uniform, and she didn't owe him a single piece of it. Yet she gave it anyway. Finally, he spoke. Your mother. Is she okay? Angela's mouth pressed into a thin line, then shook her head. Dialysis 3 times a week. She's tired. A beat. But I can't let her fall apart. She's done that for me enough times already. Michael looked at her, really looked, not at the maid, but at the daughter, the sister, the fighter, and for a man who had built walls higher than his skyscrapers. He felt something unfamiliar. Admiration. Angela stood slowly. I wasn't trying to disrespect your rules, I just couldn't leave them like that. She started to reach for her bag. Michael didn't stop her, but he didn't look away either. Behind them the twins stirred again. A soft cry echoed down the hall. Angela turned her head, waited. Michael didn't move. He just watched her. And for the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to be needed for something more than money. Michael stood in the nursery doorway. It was quiet, too quiet. 2 cribs, matching. Untouched sheets folded at the corners, bottles lined up on the table like inventory. Everything was in its place. Except him. The nurse hadn't arrived yet. Angela was gone, just for the morning, she said. But her absence echoed through the room like a missing note in a melody. He stepped inside. Slowly. Max stirred. Michael froze. The baby's eyes fluttered open, half-lidded and glassy. A soft whimper escaped his lips, then a cough, then a cry. Michael looked around like someone had triggered an alarm. No Angela, no nanny, no buffer, just him, and the weight of a child needing more than he knew how to give. He reached down awkwardly, hands stiff, lifted Max from the crib with the caution of someone handling glass. The baby cried louder. Michael cradled him, wrongly. He could feel it. Nothing about it felt natural. He sat in the rocking chair, stiff and unsteady, bouncing Max in uneven rhythm. It's okay, he muttered under his breath, more for himself than the child. You're all right. You're okay. But the baby wasn't calming, and neither was he. His shirt soaked quickly, warm against his chest. Max's skin was hot, his forehead damp. Michael panicked for a second, heart racing. Where was the thermometer? Where was the nurse? Where was the woman who made this look easy? He reached for his phone, then stopped, put it down, and looked back at Max. The baby's tiny fingers were curled into his collar, gripping him with more certainty than he felt. Something in that small hand cracked through him. Not a word, not a thought. Just a memory. A hallway. A marble floor. A smaller version of himself, wrapped in a blanket too big, calling out into silence. He hadn't known it then. But what he felt that night, that burning loneliness, that was the beginning of everything. The deals, the walls, the distance, all of it built to protect the part of him that still remembered not being held. Michael looked down at his son. Matt was stirring now too. soft cries beginning to build. For a moment he didn't know what to do. Then he stood, Max in one arm, walked to the second crib, and with far less grace than he'd like, picked up Matt. One arm for each boy, their warmth against his chest, their weight on his shoulders, their cries softening, not disappearing but changing. He sat back down, both boys pressed close. No nurse, no maid, no help, just him. For once, that wasn't terrifying. It was grounding. Matt hiccuped, then stilled. Max nestled deeper. Michael leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The silence returned. But it didn't feel empty this time. It felt full. His phone buzzed on the side table. He ignored it. Down the hall, the front door clicked open. Angela stepped in, slow and cautious, unsure of what she'd find. She turned the corner and froze. Michael didn't look up. He just kept rocking. Two boys asleep in his arms. No words. Just motion. Just effort. Angela stepped into the room, eyes soft. She opened her mouth, then stopped. Whatever she was going to say could wait. Because finally, he wasn't just holding them. He was choosing to. The boys were asleep. Angela watched from the hallway, arms crossed lightly over her chest. Michael hadn't said a word, but he didn't need to. The way he held them spoke louder than anything else. Later that afternoon, the nurse finally arrived, young, professional, emotionally distant. Angela stepped aside as she was briefed. But Michael noticed it immediately. The room didn't feel the same. The air felt thinner without her presence near the boys. He found her in the laundry room. She was folding blankets, perfectly, quietly, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. He leaned in the doorway. "Why didn't you tell me she quit?" Angela looked up, didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "I tried. You were on a plane, then in meetings, then unreachable." She said it without blame. Just fact. Michael nodded slowly, then asked the question that had been sitting on his chest since last night. "Why didn't you just let it go?" Angela paused, folded the last blanket. "Because I don't leave children crying in a room alone. Not anymore." Michael didn't push, but something about her words stayed with him. And later, in his office, glass-walled and miles above the city, he picked up his phone. "Find out what happened with the nanny," he told his assistant. Everything. The report came back within the hour. Angela had been reported, days ago, for getting too attached. The nanny had sent an email to HR, said Angela overstepped boundaries, said she warned her, said she was told to stay in her lane. Angela ignored it and held the twins anyway, even after being warned, even knowing it might cost her job. Michael read the message twice, then opened the HR logs. Sure enough, a formal warning, filed, delivered, never mentioned to him. Angela never said a word. She had taken the risk and the consequence. Also, two children wouldn't feel what she once did. Alone, unheld, unheard. He closed his laptop and just sat there, staring out at a skyline that suddenly looked hollow. He'd rewarded loyalty his entire life, with money, contracts, titles. But this was something else. The kind of loyalty that doesn't ask permission. The kind that steps into fire quietly, because it's the right thing to do. The kind that makes rules bend, because love doesn't follow protocol. A knock on the office door broke the stillness. Angela stepped in, holding a bottle of formula and a baby monitor. Matt woke up. She hesitated. "I can give him to the nurse if you'd prefer." Michael looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. "No. Bring him here." She crossed the room slowly and handed the bottle over. Michael cradled his son in one arm and took the formula in the other. He didn't ask for help. He tried, fumbled, laughed quietly under his breath. And Angela just watched. Not as a maid, not as staff, but as someone who had been there first, when no one else was. She turned to leave. Michael stopped her. Why didn't you tell me? Angela looked over her shoulder. Would it have made a difference? She didn't wait for the answer. She already knew it. The next morning, Angela arrived expecting distance, boundaries re-established, emotions reset. She was prepared to resume as nothing more than the maid, if she was still wanted at all. What she wasn't prepared for was an envelope on the counter, with her name on it. She looked around. The twins were in the nursery with the nurse. The house was still, humming faintly with morning light. She opened the envelope. Inside, a formal offer letter. Not for cleaning staff, but for household care liaison. Higher pay, clear authority, flexible schedule. And a second page, another name. Her mother. A fully arranged care plan. Transportation. Dialysis. In-home nursing. Paid for. In full. Angela didn't move for a long time. She read it again. Twice. Then heard footsteps. Michael stood in the hallway, one hand in his pocket, watching her read. No suit this morning, just a sweater. Casual, out of place on him, like someone halfway between who he was and who he might become. You said you don't walk out on people who need you. He nodded toward the paper in her hand. That offer, and that's me saying I don't either. Angela blinked, not shocked, but stunned. She set the paper down slowly. Why? Michael exhaled. Because you showed up when I didn't. And because they trust you, maybe more than they trust me. A beat. And because I don't want to keep building walls they'll have to tear down someday. Angela crossed her arms, but it wasn't defensive. It was grounding. You're changing a lot of rules. Michael gave a faint smile. They weren't working. She studied him for a moment, trying to find the catch, the agenda, the performance. There wasn't one. Just a man finally stepping into a role he had never been taught how to hold. This isn't charity, she said. I'm not a cause. I'm not broken. Michael's voice didn't waver. I know. That's why I'm asking, not offering. If you'll stay. A pause. Not as a maid, not to babysit, but to help build something better. Angela looked down. Her fingers brushed the corner of the offer letter. Matt's laughter echoed faintly from the nursery. She glanced toward the sound, then back at Michael. I'll stay, she said softly, but not to fix your life. Michael nodded. No, just to be part of it. Another silence passed between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was alive. Angela picked up the papers, tucked them neatly back into the envelope. You'll still need a real nanny, she said. Michael smiled. I need a lot of things. She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. They'll still cry in the middle of the night, still throw tantrums, still need to be held when it's inconvenient. Michael's smile faded, but not from resistance, from understanding. Good. Angela gave him a look, one that said, we'll see. Then disappeared down the hall. Michael stood alone in the kitchen, hands in his pockets, his empire still intact, but the foundation beneath it, finally shifting. It started small. Michael didn't announce it. He didn't ask. He just showed up. First it was breakfast. He sat at the table while Angela fed the twins in their high chairs, clumsy spoonfuls and sippy cups gone rogue. He watched, silent, still. She noticed, but didn't comment. The next morning, he was the one warming bottles. Angela raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. They won't drink if it's too hot. I learned that yesterday. She didn't say, good job. She didn't need to. Days passed. Routine shifted. Michael took calls in shorter bursts, stopped checking his phone when the twins were in the room, started asking questions not about numbers, about them. Why does Matt cry before naps but not bedtime? Does Max always suck his thumb when he's tired? Angela answered without judgment, with ease, like someone who'd learned to read needs before words existed. One evening she found him in the nursery, Matt on his chest, Max curled at his side, books scattered on the floor. Michael looked up, startled. We were reading. Or I was trying. Angela didn't laugh. She picked up a board book and sat beside them. She didn't tell him what to do. She showed him how to hold the bottle differently, how to swaddle without too tight a grip, how to recognize that Max's cough wasn't a cold, it was just a dry room. Michael listened, actually listened. And slowly, he changed. One night, the boys were fussy. Angela was rocking Max in the hallway when Michael emerged from the dark, Matt already in his arms. She paused. He did too, just for a breath. Then they stood there side by side, rocking, in sync. No words, just motion, just presence. Later, in the kitchen, Angela poured herself a glass of water. Michael leaned against the counter, his voice came quiet. I used to think being present was a waste of time. She looked up. Because you were always chasing something. Michael shook his head slowly. Because no one was ever present for me. I didn't think it mattered. Angela didn't pity him. She didn't soften. She just held his gaze and said, Then maybe now's your chance to be what you never had. The words didn't pierce. They landed. Heavy. True. Michael looked down at the tile, then back up. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not comfort, just understanding. Angela placed her glass in the sink. They'll wake again in 3 hours, just a warning. Michael smiled faintly. I'll be ready. She moved toward the hallway, paused. And Mr. Davies? He raised an eyebrow. She almost smiled. You're getting better. He didn't respond, but long after she left the room, he stood there. Still, letting the words settle in a place that had never held praise before. Weeks passed, but not in the way they used to, rushing forward, stacked with deals and time zones. Now, the days moved differently, measured not by meetings but by milestones, a first laugh, a new tooth, an arm reaching up for him, without hesitation. Michael's home didn't look different, but it felt it. The lights were softer. The silence was gentler, and the air no longer carried the weight of absence. One morning he walked into the kitchen and stopped without realizing why. Angela was at the table, feeding the twins. Music played faintly in the background, an old jazz record spinning low and warm. Max banged a spoon against his tray. Matt giggled, face covered in applesauce. Angela's hair was pulled back, sleeves rolled up, humming to the rhythm of the chaos. And somehow, it was beautiful. Alive. Michael stepped closer, pulled out a chair. For the first time in years, he sat. Not for business, not for obligation, just to be there. Angela looked up, gave a small nod, said nothing. She didn't need to. He watched as she wiped Matt's chin with practiced ease. He reached over to help, and for once, didn't second-guess himself. Later that afternoon, Angela's phone buzzed. A video call from her mother, smiling, color in her cheeks again. The nurse waved from the background. Michael walked by, caught the tail end of the conversation. He didn't interrupt, just listened, and quietly smiled to himself. The boys had started crawling now, which meant bruises, bumped heads, and constant supervision. Michael baby-proofed the entire living room, personally. Angela caught him rearranging outlet covers and muttered under her breath, "Control freak." He looked up. Former. They both laughed, and it stayed in the room long after the sound faded. That evening, Angela was closing the dishwasher when she turned to find him watching her. He wasn't trying to intimidate or evaluate. He was just watching. "You okay?" she asked. Michael nodded. "I was just thinking." "About what?" A pause. Then, what this house used to feel like, and what it feels like now. Angela didn't press, but she stayed, leaning against the counter, arms folded, letting the moment breathe. Michael looked around. The fingerprints on the fridge, the toys scattered on the floor, a burp cloth hanging off a chair. His past self would have fired someone for less. Now? He couldn't imagine it any other way. He ran a hand over his face, then looked at her. "You changed this place." Angela tilted her head. You let it change. Silence settled between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just still, like peace. Later that night, Michael stood in the nursery doorway. The twins slept deeply, curled against their blankets, nightlight casting soft shadows on the wall. Angela passed behind him on her way to the hall. He spoke without turning. Thank you. She paused. For what? He turned, voice quiet. For staying. Angela nodded once, then disappeared down the hall. Michael lingered in the doorway. The empire he built still stood. But now, so did something else, something soft, something real. Money built these walls, but love cracked them open. And in that light, he finally saw what mattered. He froze, his 3 sons laughing, soaking wet inside his kitchen sink, her hands in the water. And in that second, everything he thought he controlled shattered. Brian Churchill was a 45-year-old widower who hadn't been home in 2 weeks. 18 months ago, his wife died. Just like that, no warning. And he did what broken men do. When grief becomes unbearable, he ran. Not physically, but emotionally, he disappeared. He hired nannies to raise his 3-year-old triplets, Jason, James, and John. He worked constantly, traveled endlessly, convinced himself that providing was the same as being present. But deep down, he knew the truth. His sons barely recognized him anymore. It was a cold October night when he came home 3 days early from London. No warning, no phone call. The house was quiet when he walked in just after 9. Everything in its place, perfect, empty. And then he heard it. Laughter. Wild, uncontrolled laughter, coming from the kitchen. His heart stopped. The boys were supposed to be asleep. Routines were sacred. But this wasn't routine. Brian followed the sound, his shoes squeaking on the floor, until he reached the kitchen door. And when he pushed it open, everything stopped. Grace Jackson, the housekeeper he'd hired 6 months ago, was standing at his kitchen sink with all 3 of his sons inside it. Water everywhere, bubbles everywhere, and they were laughing like he hadn't heard them laugh since their mother died. For a moment, Brian couldn't breathe, because James, the one who screamed during every bath, was giggling. And this woman, this stranger, was doing something he'd completely forgotten how to do. She was making them feel safe. Brian stood frozen in that doorway, watching his sons come alive in someone else's hands. And for the first time in 18 months, he felt something crack open inside his chest. Something between grief and hope. Before we begin, like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because sometimes God uses the most unexpected people to remind us what love really looks like. 2 hours earlier, Grace Jackson stood in the kitchen, phone pressed against her ear, trying not to cry. I got in, Grace. I actually got in. Her baby brother's voice was shaking on the other end. Excited, scared, hopeful. That's amazing, Marcus, she whispered, gripping the counter. I'm so proud of you. But the tuition, the books, I don't know how I'm gonna. Don't worry about that. Grace cut him off, even though her stomach twisted. We'll figure it out. We always do. When she hung up, she stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Marcus was 18, first person in their family to get into college, and she had no idea how she was going to help him pay for it. Grace was 30, oldest of 6 kids, raised in a cramped apartment on Chicago's South Side, where her mama worked night shifts at the hospital just to keep the lights on. Grace had been the one who made sure her brothers and sisters got to school, the one who cooked dinner, the one who stayed up when they were scared. She'd had dreams once, teaching maybe, something that mattered, but bills don't wait for dreams. So when this job came up 6 months ago, good pay, room and board, working for some tech billionaire in Connecticut, she took it. She was supposed to clean, stay out of the way, back up childcare, they said, occasionally. But occasionally turned into every night. Because the nannies Mr. Churchill hired didn't care about those boys. Not really. They followed schedules, kept things quiet, made sure the house stayed perfect. But Jason, James, and John, they weren't perfect. They were sad. And Grace knew what sad looked like in a child's eyes. Grace? She turned. James was standing in the doorway in his pajamas, clutching his stuffed bear, tears streaming down his face. Hey, baby, She knelt down. "What's wrong?" "Miss Angela left," he whispered. "She said she's not coming back." Grace's jaw tightened. "Another one? That was the third nanny this month. And it's bath time." James's voice cracked. "I don't want to go upstairs." Grace's heart broke. James had slipped in the big bathtub 2 months ago, hit his head. Ever since then, he screamed every time they tried to bathe him up there. The nannies would force him anyway, holding him down while he cried, saying it was for his own good. Grace hated it. "Come here." She pulled him close, feeling his little body shake. "What if we don't use the big tub tonight?" He looked up at her, confused. "But Mr. Churchill says—" "Mr. Churchill's not here," Grace said gently. "And you know what? I think we can make bath time fun. You trust me?" James nodded. 10 minutes later, all 3 boys were in the kitchen sink. Grace had filled it with warm water and bubbles. She rolled up her sleeves, put on some old Motown song her mama used to sing, and turned the whole thing into a game. Jason wanted a bubble beard. John wanted to be a sea captain. And James? James was laughing. Actually laughing. Grace stood there with her hands in the water, singing, making up silly voices, and watching these 3 little boys forget just for a moment that they were sad. And that's when the door opened. That's when Brian Churchill walked in. That's when Grace's whole world stopped. Because the look on his face wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was grief. For a moment, nobody moved. Grace stood frozen at the sink, water dripping from her hands. The boys turned toward the doorway, eyes wide. "Daddy," Jason said it first. Then all 3 of them scrambled out of the sink, soaking wet, running straight to him. Brian dropped to his knees without thinking, catching them as they crashed into him. Their wet pajamas soaked through his suit, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around all 3 at once, holding them tighter than he had in months. "I missed you," he whispered, his voice rough. "You're home early," John said, pulling back to look at him. "Are you staying?" Brian hesitated. "Yeah, I'm staying. Can you hear the jungle story?" James tugged on his sleeve. "Grace tells it every night. There's a lion and a moon and—" "Okay, okay." Grace's voice cut through gently. She was drying her hands on a towel, not quite meeting Brian's eyes. "Bath time's over. Let's get you boys into bed." "But Daddy just got here," Jason protested. "And Daddy will still be here in the morning," Grace said, her tone kind but firm. "Come on, let's go." The boys groaned but obeyed, trailing after her toward the stairs. Brian stood slowly, watching them go. At the doorway, Grace paused, turned back. "Mr. Churchill," her voice was steady, but he could see tension in her shoulders. "I can explain." "After they're asleep," Brian said quietly. "Meet me in the study." She nodded and disappeared down the hall. 30 minutes later, Grace knocked on the study door. "Come in." She stepped inside, her hair pulled back now, her shirt changed. Professional, guarded. Brian was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. He didn't turn around. "The kitchen sink," he said. Grace took a breath. "James is terrified of the bathtub upstairs. He slipped 2 months ago. Ever since then, he screams every time we try to— So, you put all 3 of them in my kitchen sink?" "Yes." Brian finally turned. His face was unreadable. "That's not protocol." "No," Grace said. "It's not. The nannies I hire follow specific procedures. There are bathrooms upstairs for a reason." Grace met his gaze. "With respect, Mr. Churchill, your procedures were making your son cry himself to sleep every night." The words hung in the air. Brian's jaw tightened. "You're saying I don't know what's best for my own children. I'm saying James needed to feel safe." Grace's voice softened. "And in that kitchen, with me right there, he did, for the first time in weeks." Brian stared at her, and for just a second, something in his expression cracked. "When's the last time you gave them a bath?" Grace asked quietly. The question landed like a punch. Brian looked away. "I provide them with everything they need. Everything except you." Silence. Brian walked to his desk, gripping the edge of it. His knuckles went white. "You don't know what it's like," he said, his voice low. "To look at them and see her, to feel like every time you try, you're just failing." Grace's expression softened. "Maybe, but they don't need you to be perfect, Mr. Churchill. They just need you to be there." Brian closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his voice was quieter, vulnerable. "Show me," he said. Tomorrow night. Show me what you do. Grace blinked, surprised. You want to join bath time? I want to understand. She nodded slowly. Okay. As she turned to leave, Brian called after her. Miss Jackson. She stopped. Thank you, he said, for being there when I wasn't. Grace looked back at him, something sad and hopeful in her eyes. They're waiting for you to be there too. And then she was gone. The next evening, Brian came home at 6. The boys were in the kitchen with Grace when he walked in. They looked up from their coloring books, shocked. Daddy? John's crayon stopped mid-stroke. You're home. I said I would be. Brian set his briefcase down, feeling awkward in his own house. What are you guys doing? Coloring. Jason held up a page covered in wild purple scribbles. Look, it's a dinosaur. Brian studied it. That's very creative. Grace glanced at him from the stove. Dinner's almost ready. Chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. Can I help? She paused, surprised, then nodded. Sure. Can you cut up those apples? Thin slices. James won't eat them if they're chunky. Brian moved to the counter, picked up the knife, and started cutting. Too thick. He tried again. Thinner, Grace said gently, stepping beside him. Like this. Her hand guided his for just a second. Then she pulled back. Got it, Brian muttered. Jason giggled. Daddy doesn't know how to cook. Then I guess I need to learn, Brian said. Dinner was chaos. Spilled milk. Arguments over who got the blue plate. Jason singing with his mouth full. John dropping a nugget on the floor and picking it up to eat it anyway. Brian watched Grace handle it all with ease, redirecting, laughing, keeping things moving without ever raising her voice. He felt completely out of place, but he stayed. At 7:30, Grace led the boys to the kitchen. Bath time, she announced. James's face fell. In the sink again? If that's okay with your dad. 3 pairs of eyes turned to Brian. He cleared his throat. Yeah, the sink's fine. James's whole body relaxed. Grace filled the sink with warm water, added bubbles, and lifted James in first. I'm right here, buddy. James smiled. Brian stood back, watching, still unsure. Want to help with Jason? Grace asked. Brian stepped forward. Jason looked up at him, waiting. Okay, Brian said, his hands stiff. Let's get you in there. He lifted Jason carefully, like he might break. Set him down in the bubbles next to James. It's warm, Daddy, Jason said. Good. That's good. Grace handed him a washcloth. Just wash his hair, make it fun. Brian wet Jason's hair, applied shampoo. His hands were clumsy, uncertain, and then by accident he made the soap stand up in a mohawk. John burst out laughing. Jason looks like a punk rocker. Brian blinked. Then something loosened in his chest. He leaned into it. Yeah? What about this? He sculpted James's hair into spikes. The boys dissolved into giggles. Do, John! Do, John! They shouted. Brian made John's hair stick straight up. All 3 boys were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. And Brian, for the first time in 18 months, laughed with them. Really laughed. Grace stepped back, watching, a small smile on her face. This was what they needed. What he needed. After the boys were asleep, Brian found Grace cleaning the kitchen. Water was everywhere, towels in a pile. He grabbed one and started drying the counter. You don't have to. I want to. They worked in silence for a moment. Then Brian spoke, his voice quiet. I haven't heard them laugh like that since Catherine died. Grace stopped wiping. They've been waiting for you. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving them stability, the best of everything. You were protecting yourself, Grace said gently. But they don't need protection from you. They need you. Brian set the towel down, his throat tight. When it's just us, call me Brian. Grace looked at him. Then call me Grace. Something shifted between them. Small, fragile, but real. That night, Brian stood outside the boys' room, listening to them sleep talk about Daddy's funny bubbles. His chest ached. But this time, it didn't feel like grief. It felt like something thawing. 2 weeks passed. Brian came home every night by 6, sometimes earlier. He cancelled trips, rescheduled meetings, told his assistant that his evenings were no longer negotiable. The boys noticed. They started running to the door when they heard his car. Started asking, Is Daddy coming to dinner? Started including him in their games. And Brian? He started learning. That James needed his toast cut into triangles. That Jason stuffed elephant had to sit on the left side of his pillow. That John hummed when he was thinking hard about something. Small things, things a father should know. Grace watched it all happen, watched Brian slowly come back to life, watched the distance between him and his sons shrink a little more each day. And somewhere in the middle of bubble baths and bedtime stories, something else started happening. Something neither of them said out loud. The way Brian's hand would brush hers when they were folding laundry. The way Grace would catch him looking at her across the kitchen. The way they'd linger in the doorway after the boys fell asleep, talking about nothing and everything. It scared her, because she knew it couldn't last. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Grace was in the garden with the boys when her phone rang. Her sister's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, Maya. What's—" "Grace, we need help." Her stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Marcus got into college. Full acceptance. But we can't afford it. And Mama's hospital just sent another bill. We're 3 months behind on rent. I don't know what to do." Grace closed her eyes. The boys were laughing behind her, chasing butterflies. She could hear their joy, their safety. "How much do you need?" 15,000, at least." "Grace, I'm sorry. I know you're doing everything you can, but I'll figure it out." When she hung up, she stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. $15,000. She did the math in her head. Her salary barely covered it. She'd have to take a second job, which meant leaving Connecticut, which meant leaving them. That night, Grace was quiet during dinner. "Grace, are you sad?" Jason asked, tilting his head. She forced a smile. "No, baby. Just tired." But Brian saw through it. After the boys were asleep, he found her in the kitchen. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just family stuff." "Grace." She looked up at him, and for a moment, she almost told him, almost let herself lean on someone else for once. But then she remembered who he was, what she was. He was a billionaire. She was the help. "It's fine," she said. "I can handle it." Brian didn't push, but the worry stayed in his eyes. Late that night, Grace sat at the small desk in her room above the garage. She pulled out a piece of paper, stared at it for a long time. Then she started writing. "Dear Mr. Churchill, it is with deep regret that I must resign my position, effective 2 weeks from today." Her hand shook. "This has been the most meaningful work of my life. Your sons will always hold a piece of my heart." Tears fell onto the paper. "But my family needs me, and I cannot be in 2 places at once." She signed it, folded it, left it on his desk before she could change her mind. The next morning, Grace went through the motions, made breakfast, played with the boys, pretended her heart wasn't breaking, and at noon, Brian found the letter. He read it once, twice, 3 times. Then he sat down at his desk, the letter crumpled in his fist, and realized something that terrified him. This wasn't just about the boys anymore. He needed her too. Brian cancelled his afternoon meetings. He sat in his study, staring at Grace's resignation letter, and felt something inside him collapse. Effective 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks. 14 days before his sons lost the only person who'd made them feel safe again. Before they went back to being quiet, withdrawn, alone. Before he lost. Brian stopped himself. But the thought had already surfaced, and once it was there, he couldn't push it back down. This wasn't just about the boys. He found her in the garden that afternoon. The boys were napping. Grace was sitting on the bench under the oak tree, staring at nothing. She didn't hear him approach. "Grace." She turned, startled, stood up quickly. "Mr. Churchill, I was just—" "Why didn't you tell me?" She froze. Brian held up the letter. "Your family, the money. Why didn't you say anything?" Grace looked away. "Because it's not your problem. Not my—" Brian stopped himself, took a breath. "You're leaving because you need $15,000. I'm leaving because my family needs me." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the pain underneath. "My brother got into college. My mama's drowning in medical bills. I'm the oldest. This is what I do. So you're just going to walk away? From the boys? From—" He stopped. "From what?" Grace's eyes met his. Brian didn't answer. Couldn't. Because what was he supposed to say? That somewhere between bubble baths and midnight conversations, she'd become essential? That the thought of her leaving felt like losing Catherine all over again? He had no right. "They need you," he said finally. "They need you more." Grace's voice cracked. "You're their father, Brian. I'm just—" "Don't." The word came out harder than he meant. Don't say you're just anything. Grace stared at him. You saved them, Brian said quietly. You saved me. And I'm not letting you walk away because you think you have to choose between your family and mine. What are you saying? Brian pulled an envelope from his jacket. I made some calls this morning. Your brother's tuition is covered. All 4 years. Room and board, books, everything. Grace's hand went to her mouth. Brian, I can't. It's already done. Anonymous donation. His school doesn't even know it came from me. Why would you do that? Because I'm selfish. Brian's voice was raw. Because the thought of you leaving. He stopped. Started again. Because you gave my sons something I couldn't. Joy, safety, love. And I'm asking you, begging you to stay. Tears streamed down Grace's face. Not as an employee, Brian continued. As family. I want to make you their legal guardian. His voice broke. I want you to stay. Grace covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Brian took a step closer. Please. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she looked up at him, tears still falling. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. Brian exhaled, relief flooding through him. But neither of them saw the Mercedes pulling through the gates. Neither of them knew that everything was about to get much harder. Saturday morning. Brian was in the kitchen with Grace and the boys, making pancakes, flour everywhere, Jason's hands covered in batter, John trying to flip one and nearly dropping it on the floor. Laughter, warmth, the kind of morning Brian never thought he'd have again. Then the doorbell rang. Grace looked up. Were you expecting someone? Brian frowned. No. He walked to the front door, wiping flour from his hands. When he opened it, his blood went cold. Patricia, Catherine's mother, stood on the doorstep, perfectly dressed, her eyes sharp as glass. Hello, Brian. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I was in the area. Thought I'd visit my grandsons. Brian's jaw tightened. You should have called. Should I need permission to see my own family? She walked past him toward the kitchen, her heels clicking on the floor. And when she stepped into the kitchen doorway, she stopped. Brian, wearing an apron. Grace at the stove. The boys covered in flour, giggling on the counter. Patricia's expression didn't change, but her eyes said everything. The rest of the morning was unbearable. Patricia stayed, watched everything, criticized the boys' table manners, mentioned how Catherine would have handled things differently, asked pointed questions about Grace's responsibilities. Grace stayed quiet, professional, but Brian could see her pulling back, building walls. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Patricia cornered Brian in his study. We need to talk. Brian closed his laptop. About what? About her. Her name is Grace. Patricia's eyes narrowed. I'm aware. I'm also aware that she's become far too comfortable in this house. The boys cling to her, Brian. It's inappropriate. She's good for them. Or she's creating a dependency that will devastate them when she leaves. Because people like her always leave. Brian stood. What's that supposed to mean? You know exactly what it means. Patricia's voice was cold. She's the help, Brian. Let's not pretend this is something it isn't. You're a widower. You're vulnerable. And she's taking advantage of that. That's not. What do you really know about her? Her background? Her intentions? I know she loves my sons. Or she loves your money. Patricia leaned forward. Catherine has been gone barely 18 months, and you're allowing some woman to insert herself into your children's lives, into your life. Think about what you're doing. In the hallway, Grace stood frozen. She'd been bringing fresh towels for the guest room, but when she heard her name, she stopped. People like her always leave. She's the help. Taking advantage. The words cut deeper than anything she'd felt in years, because part of her had started to believe she belonged here, that maybe she wasn't just the housekeeper, that maybe Brian saw her as something more. But Patricia's voice was a mirror, showing Grace the truth she'd been trying to ignore. She didn't belong in this world. She never would. Grace set the towels on the hall table and walked away, her chest so tight she couldn't breathe. Inside the study, Brian's voice was low, firm. Grace is staying. As family. I'm making her the boys' legal guardian. Patricia's face went pale. You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Then you're a fool. Patricia grabbed her purse and walked to the door. Paused. This will end badly, Brian. And when it does, don't say I didn't warn you. She left. Brian sat alone in the silence, his chest heavy. He didn't know Grace had heard. He didn't know the damage was already done. The next morning, something was different. Grace was in the kitchen when Brian came down. She had breakfast ready. The boys were eating. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. "Good morning," Brian said. "Good morning, Mr. Churchill." Her voice was polite, distant. Mr. Churchill, not Brian. He felt the shift immediately, like a door had closed between them. The rest of the day was the same. Grace stayed professional, did her job, played with the boys. But there was a wall now, something she'd put up overnight that Brian couldn't reach through. At dinner, he tried. "Grace, about yesterday, my mother-in-law. It's fine." She didn't look at him. "She has every right to be concerned about her grandchildren. That's not what I... Excuse me, I need to start their bath." She left the room before he could finish. That night, Grace stood at the kitchen sink, the same sink where everything had started, and felt her heart breaking. She'd been foolish. So foolish. For 2 weeks, she'd let herself believe in something that didn't exist, that she could be part of this family, that Brian saw her as more than just the help. But Patricia's words had torn that illusion apart. "She's the help, Brian. Let's not pretend this is something it isn't." Grace looked down at her hands in the soapy water and realized the truth. No matter how much the boys loved her, no matter how much she'd started to feel at home here, she would never truly belong. Not in this world. Not in his world. Upstairs, the boys sensed it too. "Why is Grace sad?" James whispered to Brian during story time. "I don't know, buddy. Did we do something wrong?" "No, you didn't do anything wrong." But John climbed into Brian's lap, looking up at him with worried eyes. "Is Grace leaving?" Brian's throat tightened. "No, she's not leaving." "Promise?" "I promise." But even as he said it, Brian felt the lie in his chest, because something had changed, and he didn't know how to fix it. Late that night, Brian stood outside Grace's door above the garage. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. What could he say? That he'd defended her to Patricia? That didn't erase the words Grace must have heard. That didn't change the reality of who they were. A billionaire and his housekeeper. 2 different worlds that had collided for a moment, but were never meant to stay together. Brian lowered his hand, walked back to the house alone, and neither of them slept that night, both staring at the ceiling in separate rooms, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on their chests. Grace thought about leaving again, packing her bags, disappearing before this hurt any worse. Brian thought about how empty the house would feel without her, how quiet the boys would become, how much he'd come to need her presence in ways he couldn't admit. And outside, the night stretched on, cold, dark, heavy with the kind of silence that comes right before everything falls apart. Sunday afternoon, Patricia insisted on hosting lunch. A proper meal, she said, with proper company. She invited a family from her country club, set the table with china, made everything formal and cold. The boys sat quietly, uncomfortable in their stiff clothes. Grace was in the kitchen, told to assist with serving. Brian hated it, but he didn't know how to fight his mother-in-law without making things worse. Patricia served pasta. Expensive, elegant, with shellfish. Grace was clearing plates when she saw it. Her blood went cold. "Mrs. Whitmore," she stepped forward quickly. "James can't eat that. He's allergic to shellfish." Patricia waved her off. "A little exposure builds immunity. My doctor friend told me so." "No," Grace's voice was firm. "He's severely allergic. Please don't. I think I know what's best for my grandson." Grace looked at Brian. He was about to speak when Patricia cut him off. "Grace, you're overstepping." Again. Grace backed away, her hands shaking, and James took a bite. 5 minutes later, James started scratching his throat. "Mummy." He stopped, looked confused. "Grace, my throat feels weird." Grace was at his side instantly. Hives were breaking out on his arms. His breathing was getting shallow. "James?" Brian stood, panic rising. "What's wrong?" "He's having an allergic reaction." Grace's voice was calm, but her hands moved fast. She pulled an EpiPen from her apron pocket. She'd been carrying it for months, just in case. Patricia went pale. "What are you?" Grace didn't answer. She administered the injection, steady and sure, then pulled out her phone. "This is Grace Jackson. I need an ambulance." 3-year-old boy. Severe allergic reaction. EpiPen administered. "Yes, He's breathing. We're at. Brian couldn't move, couldn't think. Just watched Grace hold James, keeping him calm, whispering to him, "You're okay, baby. I've got you. Just breathe with me. In and out." James clung to her. "Grace." Scared. "I know, but you're safe. I promise." The ambulance came. Grace rode with James. Brian followed with Jason and John. At the hospital, the doctor pulled them aside. "You saved his life. Another few minutes and this could have been much worse." James was in a bed, recovering, and he wouldn't let go of Grace's hand. Jason and John sat on either side of her, pressed close. Brian stood in the doorway, watching, and something inside him shattered. This woman, his mother-in-law had called the help, had been prepared, had carried an EpiPen for months against everyone's advice, had known his son better than anyone, had saved his life. Patricia appeared beside him, her face pale with guilt. She looked at Grace holding James, at the way all three boys clung to her. "I was wrong," Patricia whispered. Brian didn't respond, because he was done listening to anyone's opinion about Grace. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, Brian sat across from Grace. She looked exhausted, shaken. "I found your resignation letter," he said quietly. Grace looked down. "Brian, I'm not accepting it. Your mother-in-law made it very clear where I stand. I don't care what she thinks." Brian leaned forward. "Grace, you saved my son's life today, but more than that, you've been saving all of us since the day you got here." Tears filled her eyes. "Stay," Brian said. "Please, not because I'm asking you to, because you want to, because you're family." Grace's voice broke. "People like me don't belong in families like yours. Then maybe I've been in the wrong family." Brian reached across the table, took her hand. "Maybe the right family is the one you choose, the one that chooses you back." Grace stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm staying," she whispered, and for the first time in days, Brian breathed. 6 months later, spring came to Connecticut, bringing warmth after a long winter. The Churchill estate looked different now. Toys scattered on the lawn, drawings taped to the fridge, laughter echoing through rooms that used to feel like a museum. Brian had restructured everything, came home by 5 every day, no weekend travel, no more running. The boys were different too, louder, happier, more alive. And Grace? She was still there, not as the housekeeper, not as the help, as family. One evening, Brian stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. Grace was at the sink, the same sink where everything had started giving the boys their bath. They were 4 now, still giggling, still splashing, still turning bath time into an adventure. But this time, Brian didn't just watch. He walked over, rolled up his sleeves, joined them. "Daddy, you're getting soaked," John squealed. "That's the point, isn't it?" Brian grinned, making bubble beards on all 3 boys. Grace caught his eye and smiled. And in that moment, Brian realized something. He'd spent 18 months trying to control everything, trying to keep the grief at bay by staying busy, by keeping his distance, by doing everything the right way. But Grace had shown him something different, that sometimes love means getting messy, means breaking your own rules, means showing up even when you're scared of getting it wrong. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Brian and Grace sat on the back porch. The air was warm. The stars were out. "Jason drew another picture today," Grace said softly. "Yeah? 5 people this time. You, me, and the boys. He titled it, 'My Family.'" Brian's throat tightened. "Is that what we are?" Grace looked at him. "I think so. Don't you?" Brian nodded. "Yeah, I think we are." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Grace spoke quietly. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think God knew exactly what he was doing, bringing me here, to this house, to your boys." She paused. "To you." Brian reached over, took her hand. "I think Catherine would have liked you." "Yeah?" "Yeah. She always said the best things in life come when you're not looking for them, when you stop trying to control everything and just let Grace in." Grace smiled, tears in her eyes. "Grace, that's ironic. Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly how it was supposed to be." The next morning, Brian came downstairs to find chaos in the kitchen. Grace was making pancakes with the boys, flour everywhere, batter on the counters, music playing. Pure, beautiful mess. Grace looked up, caught him watching, and laughed. Don't just stand there. We need help. Brian walked over, and as he stepped into the noise and the laughter and the mess, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because everyone he loved was right there. Present, laughing, together. That evening, Patricia called. "How are my grandsons?" she asked, her voice softer than it used to be. "They're good. Happy." A pause. Then, "And Grace, is she still there?" "She is." "Good." Patricia's voice cracked slightly. "That's good, Brian. Catherine would be proud of you." When Brian hung up, he stood there for a moment, letting those words settle. Then he walked into the living room where Grace was reading to the boys. He sat down beside them. James crawled into his lap. Jason leaned against Grace. John sprawled across both of them, and Brian closed his eyes, listening to Grace's voice, feeling his son's weight against him, and whispered a prayer he hadn't prayed in months. "Thank you for second chances, for grace that shows up when you need it most, for family that finds you even when you've stopped looking, for love that heals, for coming home. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes grace walks through your door, wearing an apron and carrying hope you didn't know you needed. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you through the mess." Brian Churchill learned that the hard way, but he learned. And in a kitchen where 3 little boys once learned to laugh again, a broken man learned something too. That being a good father isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about love. It's about grace. If this story touched something deep in your soul, I want to hear from you. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe in second chances. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone walk into your life and change everything? Share this with someone who needs to know that healing is possible, that grace is real, that sometimes God uses the most unexpected people to put broken families back together. Because maybe, just maybe, this story found you for a reason. He walked in and saw his father in another woman's arms, and in that one moment, blinded by fear, by rage, by everything he thought he knew, Leonard Scott destroyed the only person who'd refused to give up on his father. Leonard hadn't been home in 3 weeks. He'd been in London closing a deal that would change his company forever. But something kept pulling at him, a voice in the back of his mind that said, "Go home, see your father." So he left early, 3 days ahead of schedule. He walked through the front door, tired but smiling. He wanted to surprise Thomas, maybe sit with him, talk. It had been too long. He climbed the stairs and heard voices coming from his father's room. Thomas's labored breathing, a soft groan, then her voice gentle, encouraging. Leonard's stomach tightened. He pushed the door open. Olivia Grant's arms were wrapped around his father. Thomas's face tilted back, eyes closed, breath coming hard. Their bodies pressed so close Leonard's mind couldn't process what he was seeing. He didn't see the 6 steps his father had just taken for the first time in 8 months. He didn't see Thomas's legs shaking, about to collapse. He didn't see Olivia catch him the way someone who cares catches someone who's falling. All Leonard saw was betrayal. "What the hell are you doing with my father?" Olivia spun around, startled, her arms still supporting Thomas. Leonard's face went pale, then red. "Get your hands off him. Mr. Scott, please, I can explain." "Explain what?" His voice cracked. "You think I don't see what's happening here?" He shoved her. Hard. Olivia stumbled backward, her arms slamming into the nightstand. Blood appeared on her skin. Mrs. Chen stood frozen in the doorway. Staff members whispered. "She's been alone with him every day." Leonard grabbed Olivia by the arm. "You're done. Pack your things. Get out." Thomas tried to speak. "Leonard," she was helping, but his voice was too weak. The walking had drained him. Leonard looked at his father and saw exhaustion, confusion, vulnerability. She's been taking advantage of him, he thought. Olivia didn't fight. She walked out without another word, blood running down her arm, dignity still intact. But her heart was breaking. Not for herself, for Thomas, who'd just had his miracle stolen. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because if you've ever given everything and been accused of the worst, this story will break you open. Sometimes grace works through the people we destroy, and what Leonard's about to discover will change everything. 2:17 in the morning, Leonard sat in the blue glow of the computer screen, his coffee long gone cold. He'd been watching for 3 hours now. The first video started simple enough. August 15th, 3:42 p.m. Olivia walked into his father's room carrying printed diagrams. She showed them to Thomas, pointing at different exercises. Leg lifts, ankle rotations, balance work. Thomas looked at the paper, then at her. His mouth moved. Leonard couldn't hear the audio through the old system, but he could read his father's lips. "I couldn't even lift my foot yesterday." Olivia's response was clear. She pointed at Thomas, then at the calendar on the wall, her expression gentle but firm. Yesterday was yesterday. Today is today. Leonard leaned closer. For 20 minutes, Olivia worked with his father. Patient, steady, never rushing. When Thomas managed to lift his leg 3 inches off the bed, his whole face changed. Shock first. Then something Leonard hadn't seen in months. Joy. Olivia clapped softly, smiled, and Thomas smiled back. Leonard's throat tightened. He clicked to the next video. September 3rd. Thomas stood with his walker, gripping the handles so hard his knuckles were white. Olivia stood beside him, one hand hovering near his back, not touching, just ready. Thomas took one step, then his legs started shaking. Panic flashed across his face. Olivia moved fast. Her arms went around his torso, supporting his weight, and she lowered him gently into the wheelchair. The exact position Leonard had seen today. The exact embrace he'd misunderstood. Thomas sat there, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He was crying. Olivia didn't speak. She just pulled a chair next to him and sat, handed him water, waited. After a few minutes, Thomas looked up at her. Even without sound, Leonard could see his father mouth the words, "I'm sorry." Olivia shook her head. She pointed at the walker, then at Thomas. Then she made a walking motion with her fingers. "You will walk. I'm not giving up on you." Leonard's hand trembled on the mouse. He clicked another video. September 22nd. This time, Thomas stood and took 2 steps, then 3, then 5. His legs gave out, but Olivia caught him, and when she lowered him into the chair, Thomas buried his face in his hands again. But this time, he wasn't crying from frustration. He was crying from joy. Olivia knelt beside the wheelchair. She took his hand, and Leonard watched his father mouth the words that would haunt him forever. "You gave me my life back." Leonard stood up so fast his chair fell over. He stumbled to the window, gripping the frame, his breath coming hard. "Oh God, what have I done?" He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the rain was coming down harder now. The world blurred. Behind him, the video kept playing. He could hear it, the silent footage of his father learning to walk again, learning to hope again, because of her. And he'd thrown her out like garbage. Leonard's chest tightened, his hands started shaking. He turned back to the desk and clicked another video. October 1st. The camera showed Olivia in the corner of the room, sitting on the floor, her head in her hands. Thomas was asleep in his chair, exhausted from therapy, and Olivia was crying. Her whole body shook with silent sobs. She wiped her eyes, took a breath, composed herself. Then she stood, checked on Thomas, and went back to organizing his medications. She never asked for help, never complained, never stopped. Leonard sank into the chair. The next video was dated 2 weeks ago. Olivia's face looked thinner, tired, but she still showed up, still smiled at Thomas, still believed. Leonard opened another window on his computer, pulled up Olivia's payroll file, and that's when he saw it. Direct deposit, 40% of her stated salary. The rest, withheld at her request. Reason, equipment and supplies for patient care, personal expense. She'd been paying to help his father. Leonard's vision blurred. He clicked back to the footage. Today's date, 4 p.m. He watched Thomas take 6 steps. 6 beautiful, impossible steps. Watched his legs start to give. Watched Olivia catch him in that perfect therapeutic hold. Watched his father whisper, "Thank you." And then watched himself burst through the door. Watched himself destroy everything. Leonard put his head in his hands. "Oh God," he whispered into the empty room. "What have I done?" Leonard didn't sleep. He sat in that chair until the sun came up, watching video after video. 8 months of footage. 8 months of Olivia showing up every single afternoon at 3:30, no matter what. There was the day Thomas threw his water bottle across the room in frustration. Olivia didn't flinch. She picked it up, refilled it, and sat beside him until he was ready to try again. There was the session where Thomas's leg cramped so badly he screamed. Olivia massaged it for 20 minutes, patient and gentle, until the pain passed. There was the afternoon she arrived with her eyes red and swollen. Clearly she'd been crying about something. But the moment she walked into Thomas's room, she smiled. She showed up for him anyway. Leonard's hands wouldn't stop shaking. At 6 in the morning, he grabbed his keys and headed downstairs. Alan was already in the kitchen, preparing morning tea. "Where is she?" Leonard asked. His voice came out hoarse. "Where did Olivia go?" Alan looked up, surprised. I don't know, sir. She left around 1 this morning, didn't say where." Leonard's chest tightened. "Did she leave a forwarding address? A phone number?" "No, sir. She just left." Leonard ran a hand through his hair. "What about her things, her room?" "Empty." Leonard turned and headed toward the guest wing anyway. He pushed open the door to Olivia's room. Alan was right. Empty. The bed was made. The surfaces wiped clean. It looked like no one had ever lived there at all, except for one thing. On the dresser, a small stack of receipts held down by a rock. Leonard walked over and picked up the top one. Meadowbrook, nursing home supply, resistance bands, $47. The next one, medical equipment, depot, balance board, $83. The next, therapeutic footwear, $126. Leonard flipped through them. Dozens of receipts, hundreds of dollars, all of it Olivia's own money. Beneath the receipts, a work schedule from Meadowbrook Nursing Home, night shift, 3 days a week, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. She'd been working 2 jobs, just to help his father. Leonard's legs gave out. He sat on the edge of the bed, the receipts trembling in his hands. On the nightstand, he noticed something else, a small notepad. The top page had been torn off, but the imprint remained. He held it up to the light. "Mum, deposited $800. Should cover this month. Love you." Leonard closed his eyes. She'd been sending money home, to her mother, and still somehow found a way to buy equipment for Thomas. A soft knock at the door. Alan stepped inside. "Sir, your father is awake. He's asking for Miss Grant." Leonard looked up. "What do I tell him?" Alan's expression was gentle but firm. "The truth, sir. It's all we have left." Leonard stood slowly, the receipts still in his hand. He walked down the hall to his father's room. Thomas was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at nothing. "Dad." Thomas didn't turn. "Is she gone?" Leonard's throat closed. "Yes. Did you apologize?" I tried to find her. She's not." "Did you apologize?" Thomas's voice was quiet, broken. "Not yet." Thomas finally turned, and the look in his eyes, disappointment, grief, something deeper than anger, nearly broke Leonard in half. "She gave me everything," Thomas whispered, "and you took it all away." Leonard's hands shook. "I know. I watched the footage. I saw everything. Then you know what you destroyed." Leonard nodded. He couldn't speak. Thomas turned back to the window. "Find her, make this right, or don't come back." Leonard drove to the address listed on Olivia's employment file, a small apartment complex in Riverside, 40 minutes from the estate. He knocked on apartment 3B. No answer. He knocked again, harder. A door opened across the hall. An elderly woman in a faded robe peered out. "You looking for Olivia?" "Yes." "Do you know where she is?" The woman studied him. Her eyes narrowed. "You're him, aren't you? The one who fired her?" Leonard's jaw tightened. "Please, I need to find her. She doesn't live here anymore. Moved out 2 months back to save money. Do you know where she went?" The woman hesitated, then sighed. "She works nights at Meadowbrook. That's all I know." Leonard was already heading back to his car. Meadowbrook Nursing Home sat on the edge of town, a low brick building with tired landscaping. Leonard pulled into the parking lot just after 7 in the morning. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. A nurse sat behind the front desk, filing charts. "I'm looking for Olivia Grant," Leonard said. The nurse looked up. Her expression shifted when she recognized him. "You've got some nerve showing up here. Please, I just need to talk to her. She's with a patient, and I'm not interrupting her for you." Leonard stepped back. "Then I'll wait. Suit yourself." He sat in the hard plastic chair by the window. The minutes crawled. He watched through the glass as Olivia moved through the corridor with an elderly man, helping him practice walking with a cane. Her movements were the same ones he'd seen in the videos, patient, gentle, focused. The man took 4 shaky steps and smiled. Olivia smiled back, and something in Leonard's chest cracked open. 6 o'clock came. Shift change. Olivia emerged from the patient wing, pulling her jacket on. She looked exhausted. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them. She froze when she saw Leonard. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Leonard followed. "Olivia, please, just give me 5 minutes." She pushed through the door into the grey morning light. "I don't have anything to say to you." "Then just listen." She kept walking toward her car, a beat-up Honda with a dented bumper. Leonard's voice cracked. "I watched the footage. All of it. 8 months of it." Olivia stopped. Her hand was on the car door handle, but she didn't open it. "I know what you did for my father," Leonard continued. "I know you paid for his equipment yourself. I know you worked 2 jobs just to afford it. I know you never asked me for anything." Olivia's jaw tightened. "And now what? You watched some videos and decided I'm acceptable?" "No." Leonard stepped closer. "Nothing makes what I did acceptable. I was wrong. Completely wrong. You humiliated me in front of everyone." Her voice shook. "You shoved me. You called me a predator. You threw me out like I was nothing. I know. You have no idea what you took from me." Tears filled her eyes now. "I gave your father everything I had, every afternoon, every ounce of strength, and you destroyed it in 5 minutes." Leonard pulled out his phone, showed her the bank statements, the receipts. "You paid for his therapy out of your own pocket. You worked overnight just to afford it." Olivia looked away. "That doesn't matter now." "It matters to me." Leonard's voice dropped. "My father won't speak to me. He told me to find you, or not come back." Olivia wiped her eyes. "Good. He's right. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him." Leonard paused. "I want to make this right. I'm creating a foundation for stroke survivors who can't afford rehabilitation." Olivia laughed bitterly. "You think money fixes this?" "No, but it's a start." He met her eyes. "I'm funding it with $50 million, and I want you to run it. As Director of Patient Care, full benefits, $250,000 a year. You hire your own staff. You set your own protocols." Olivia stared at him. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't." Leonard's voice was raw. "But my father does. He wrote you a letter, asked me to give you this." He handed her a folded paper, Thomas's handwriting. Olivia opened it. "Read it." Her hands trembled. "He wants you back," Leonard said quietly. "Not as a maid, as family." Olivia folded the letter, pressed it to her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "I'll come back. For him, not for you." Leonard nodded. "And I have conditions," she continued. "You don't question my medical decisions. You don't interfere with my methods. And you publicly clear my name with every person who saw what happened." "Done." Olivia opened her car door, then stopped. "One more thing. Anything. When your father walks again, really walks, you'll be there to see it, and you'll remember what you almost destroyed." Leonard's eyes filled. "I'll never forget." Olivia returned to the estate 3 days later. The West Wing had been transformed. Contractors had installed wheelchair ramps, safety rails, therapy equipment. What used to be a drawing room was now a rehabilitation center. Leonard stood in the main hallway when she arrived, hands in his pockets, unsure what to say. Olivia walked past him without a word. Thomas was in the therapy room, sitting by the window. When he saw her, his whole face changed. "Olivia." She crossed the room and knelt beside his wheelchair. "I'm here." Thomas reached for her hand, held it like he'd been drowning and she was air. "I thought you were gone for good." "I was," she said softly. "But you asked me to come back." "Thank you." His voice cracked. "Thank you." Leonard watched from the doorway, the reunion he should have had with his father, the forgiveness he didn't deserve. Thomas looked past Olivia and met Leonard's eyes. There was no warmth there, just distance. "Come see what we've built, Dad," Leonard said quietly. Thomas nodded, but he didn't let go of Olivia's hand. Over the next 2 weeks, Olivia built a team. Dr. James Chen, a neurologist who'd been following her work for months, signed on immediately. Then Patricia Morrison, a physical therapist from the VA. David Okafor, who'd trained in Nigeria and brought techniques Leonard had never seen before. The team worked like family. They laughed during breaks. They celebrated small victories. They believed in the work. But between Leonard and Olivia, there was only silence. He tried once, brought her coffee the way she used to drink it. 2 sugars, no cream. She looked at the cup, then at him. "I can make my own coffee." She walked away. Leonard poured it down the sink. The foundation's first patient arrived on a Tuesday morning. Margaret Chen, Dr. Chen's mother, 67. Left side paralyzed from a stroke 4 months earlier. She rolled through the door in a transport wheelchair, her face hollow with defeat. "They told me I'm done," she said to Olivia. "That this is it." Olivia knelt beside her. They were wrong. Margaret's eyes filled. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen what people can do when someone refuses to give up on them." Margaret looked at Thomas, who was standing now, leaning on his cane, but standing. "That's Mr. Scott," Olivia said. 8 months ago, doctors said he'd never leave his wheelchair. Now look at him." Thomas walked forward, slow, unsteady, but walking. He stopped in front of Margaret. "It's going to hurt. Some days you'll hate us, but we're not going anywhere." Margaret started crying. Olivia handed her a tissue. "Let's get started." Leonard watched from his office window as Olivia worked with Margaret that first afternoon. The same patience, the same belief, the same refusal to accept defeat. And he realized something that made his chest ache. Olivia had been doing this all along. Not for recognition, not for money, not even for gratitude. She did it because she couldn't walk away from people who needed her. Even when walking away would have been easier, even when staying cost her everything. That evening, Leonard found Olivia in the therapy room, cleaning equipment. "Can I help?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I've got it." "Olivia, don't." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Don't try to fix this with words. You want to make it right? Then show up. Do the work. Prove you actually care about these people, and not just your guilt." She walked past him, turned off the lights, and left. Leonard stood in the dark. And for the first time in his life, he understood the difference between saying sorry and becoming sorry, between wanting forgiveness and earning change. He had a long way to go. 3 weeks into Margaret Chen's therapy, something changed. Olivia was working with her in the main therapy room. Margaret's left foot, the one that hadn't moved since her stroke, was strapped into a specialized brace. "I can't feel anything," Margaret whispered. "It's like my leg doesn't exist." Olivia knelt beside her. "Close your eyes. Don't try to move it. Just think about your toes. Imagine them wiggling." Margaret closed her eyes. Her face tightened with concentration. Nothing happened. Thomas sat in the corner, watching. He'd been coming every morning now, mentoring new patients, showing them it was possible. "Try again," Olivia said softly. Margaret's breath came faster. Her hands gripped the armrests. And then, so small it was almost invisible, her left big toe moved. Just a twitch, barely a millimeter, but it moved. Margaret's eyes flew open. "Did I? Did you see?" "I saw it." Olivia's voice shook. "You did it." Margaret started sobbing. "I felt it. Oh my God, I felt it." Dr. Chen, who'd been standing nearby reviewing charts, dropped everything and rushed over. "Mom, I moved my toe." Margaret grabbed her son's hand. "I moved my toe." The entire staff stopped. Patricia, David, Sarah, everyone gathered around. Thomas stood from his chair, no walker, just his cane, and crossed the room. "That's it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the beginning." Margaret looked up at him, tears streaming. "You really did this? You really walked again?" Thomas smiled. "Because she wouldn't let me quit." He gestured to Olivia. "And she won't let you quit either." Leonard watched from the hallway. He'd been doing that a lot lately. Watching, learning, seeing what Olivia had been trying to show his father all along. This wasn't about physical therapy. It was about belief, about refusing to accept what the world said was impossible. He thought about the man he'd been 3 weeks ago, the man who'd walked into his father's room and seen only what he expected to see. Fear, suspicion, betrayal. He'd been so convinced he was protecting his father, so certain he knew best, but he'd been protecting himself. From vulnerability, from the discomfort of needing someone, from the truth that sometimes the people who help us most are the ones we least expect. That evening, after the patients had gone home and the staff had left, Leonard found Olivia sitting alone in the therapy room. She wasn't working, just sitting, staring at Margaret's walker. "You gave her hope today," Leonard said quietly from the doorway. Olivia didn't turn. She gave it to herself. "No." Leonard stepped inside. "You did. The same way you gave it to my father." Olivia finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired, but something in them had softened, just slightly. "Why do you do it?" Leonard asked. "Even after everything I put you through, why do you keep showing up?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because my mother never got this chance. She had a stroke when I was 19. No insurance, no resources, just me trying to figure it out alone." Her voice wavered. "She never walked again. She spent 4 years in that chair before she died. And every single day, I wondered if I'd done enough, if I'd tried hard enough, if maybe she could have." She stopped, swallowed hard. "That's why," she whispered. "Because every person I help walk is the second chance my mother never got." Leonard's throat closed. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a job for Olivia. It was a mission, a calling, a way of carrying her mother's memory forward. And he'd almost destroyed it. "I'm sorry," Leonard said, and this time the words meant something different, deeper. Olivia nodded, didn't say anything, but she didn't leave either. They sat in that quiet room together, not as employer and employee, not as enemy and victim, just as two people learning to be human again. The call came on a Thursday morning. Leonard was in his office when his assistant knocked. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. Marcus Dalton." Leonard looked up. "Dalton?" "He says it's urgent." Leonard hadn't seen Marcus Dalton in 15 years, not since his father cut ties with him over Medicare fraud allegations. The man had rebuilt his empire, since then, Dalton Health Systems, 27 rehabilitation facilities across 3 states. Dalton walked in, wearing a $1,000 suit and a practiced smile. "Leonard, it's been too long." Leonard didn't shake his hand. "What do you want?" Dalton sat without being invited. "I'm here as a friend. Your little foundation is making waves. Good waves. But you're disrupting some very established systems." "That's the point." "I'm sure it is." Dalton's smile thinned. "But you're also creating liability concerns. Your director, Miss Grant, she doesn't have proper licensing. No degree. No certification. What happens when someone gets hurt? She's more qualified than half the therapists I've met. I'm sure she's lovely, but legally speaking, you're vulnerable." Dalton leaned forward. "I'd hate to see something happen that forces the state to shut you down." Leonard's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice." Dalton stood. "Think about it. You're doing good work. Don't let one unqualified person ruin it." He left. Leonard sat there, a cold weight settling in his chest. 3 days later, the news broke. Leonard's phone buzzed with alerts. He opened the first link. Troubled pastor foundation director raises questions. His stomach dropped. The article featured a scanned document, official letterhead, from St. Catherine's nursing facility. A termination letter dated 2019. Miss Olivia Grant was released from employment due to inappropriate conduct with a patient. Leonard's hands went numb. He scrolled further. Comments were already piling up. "I knew something was off about her. These people prey on the vulnerable. Shut it down before someone gets hurt." Leonard grabbed his keys and ran. He found Olivia in the therapy room with Margaret. She was kneeling beside the wheelchair, guiding Margaret through leg exercises. "Olivia," she looked up, saw his face. "What's wrong?" He held out his phone. Olivia took it. "Read the article." Her face went pale. "I never worked at St. Catherine's," she whispered. "I know. This is a lie. All of it." Her voice shook. "Who would?" "Dalton," Leonard said. "It has to be." Margaret looked between them, confused. "What's happening?" Olivia handed Leonard his phone back. Her hands were trembling. "It doesn't matter if it's true or not. People will believe it. We'll fight it," Leonard said. "We'll get lawyers. They already believe it." Olivia's voice cracked. "Look at the comments. They've already decided who I am." Leonard's phone buzzed again. Another news outlet, then another. The story was spreading. Olivia stood slowly, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the glass. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm more than my circumstances," she said quietly. "No degree, no money, no credentials, just hard work and belief." She turned, Tears streamed down her face, and in one article, they erased all of it. Margaret wheeled closer. "Olivia, we know the truth. Everyone here knows." But Olivia shook her head. "3 families already called this morning. They're pulling their loved ones out. They don't want me near them." Leonard's chest tightened. "We'll fix this." "How?" Olivia's voice broke completely now. "How do you fix a lie that people want to believe?" She walked past him, out of the room. Leonard stood there, Margaret looking up at him with worry in her eyes. And for the second time, Leonard watched Olivia walk away, not because she wanted to, but because someone had taken her dignity and torn it to pieces. Only this time, he wasn't the one who'd done it, but he was the one who had to fix it. Olivia stopped coming to the estate. She didn't quit, didn't make an announcement. She just stopped showing up. Leonard called her phone. No answer. He drove to Meadowbrook. The nurse at the desk said Olivia had taken a leave of absence. "Where is she?" "I don't know. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Leonard stood in the parking lot, lost. Back at the foundation, the damage was spreading. 5 families pulled their loved ones out. The phone stopped ringing with new inquiries. Donors who'd pledged money suddenly had budget concerns. Margaret Chen was one of the few who stayed. "I don't care what they say," she told Leonard. "Olivia gave me my life back. I'm not leaving." But even Margaret's loyalty couldn't stop what was coming. The State Medical Board sent a formal notice. An investigation had been opened. Allegations of practicing medicine without a license. A hearing scheduled in 10 days. If the board ruled against them, the foundation would be shut down permanently. Leonard sat in his father's study that night, surrounded by legal documents he barely understood. Thomas wheeled himself in. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there in the dim light. "I failed her again," Leonard finally said. "Yes," Thomas replied quietly. "You did." Leonard looked up, expecting anger, but his father's face held something else. Sadness. "I spent 40 years building companies," Thomas continued, "making deals, winning. And you know what I learned when I had that stroke?" Leonard shook his head. "That winning doesn't mean anything if you don't know who you're fighting for." Thomas leaned forward. "You're sitting here drowning in paperwork. But Olivia's out there somewhere, alone, believing the world thinks she's a monster. I don't know where she is." "Then find her." Thomas's voice was firm now. "Stop hiding behind lawyers and documents. Go find her. And when you do, don't tell her you'll fix it. Show her she's not alone." Leonard drove for 2 hours before he found her. A small chapel on the edge of town. The parking lot was empty except for one beat-up Honda. Inside, the chapel was dim. Candles flickered near the altar. Olivia sat in the front pew, head bowed, hands folded. Leonard slid into the pew beside her, said nothing, just sat. After a long silence, Olivia spoke. "My mother used to bring me here when I was little, when things got hard." Her voice was barely a whisper. She'd say, "When people don't see you, God does." Leonard's throat tightened. "I keep telling myself that," Olivia continued, "that the truth matters, that God sees. But it doesn't stop the pain." "I know." Olivia finally looked at him. Her eyes were red, exhausted. "Why are you here?" "Because you shouldn't be alone. I've been alone before." "I know, but not this time." Olivia looked back at the altar. A tear slid down her cheek. "They're going to shut us down, aren't they?" "Not if I can help it." "You can't fight this, Leonard. Dalton has money, lawyers, power. So do I." Leonard turned to face her. "But more than that, we have something he doesn't." "What?" "The truth. And people who've lived it." Olivia wiped her eyes. "Margaret, and Thomas, and every patient whose life you changed." Leonard's voice grew stronger. "They're going to testify. They're going to tell the board exactly who you are." Olivia's breath caught. "You think it'll be enough?" "I don't know," Leonard admitted. "But I'm not giving up. And neither are you." For the first time in days, something shifted in Olivia's face. Not hope. Not yet. But the possibility of it. She nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay? Let's fight." Leonard felt something release in his chest. They sat together in that quiet chapel, candlelight dancing on the walls, and for the first time since the lie broke, Olivia didn't feel alone. And Leonard understood what his father had been trying to teach him all along. You don't save people by fixing their problems. You save them by standing beside them when everything falls apart. The State Medical Board hearing room was cold, sterile. 5 board members sat behind an elevated bench, faces unreadable. Dalton's legal team filled the front row. 4 attorneys in matching suits. Leonard sat beside Olivia. Patricia Okafor, the civil rights attorney David's sister had recommended, sat on Olivia's other side. The board chair cleared his throat. "We're here to determine whether the Second Chance Foundation has engaged in unlicensed medical practice." Dalton's lead attorney stood, presented the forged Street Catherine's letter, called a handwriting expert who claimed Olivia's signature matched, brought forward anonymous testimonies from patients claiming they felt pressured, emphasized Olivia's lack of credentials. "This woman," the attorney said, "has no degree, no license, no formal training. She's practicing medicine on vulnerable people, and this board has a duty to protect the public." Olivia's hands trembled in her lap. Leonard reached over and covered them with his own. She didn't pull away. Patricia stood. "Your Honor, may we call witnesses?" The board chair nodded. The gallery doors opened. Margaret Chen wheeled herself in, but halfway down the aisle, she stopped, gripped the armrests, and stood. The room went silent. Margaret took 4 slow, deliberate steps, then 4 more. She reached the witness stand and turned to face the board. "3 months ago, doctors told me I'd never walk again. Insurance called me maximum medical improvement. Gave up on me." Her voice shook. "Miss Grant didn't. She saw something in me nobody else could see. And now I'm standing here." A board member leaned forward. "Mrs. Chen, we're not disputing Miss Grant's intentions." "Then don't dispute her results," Margaret interrupted. "I walked into Dalton's facility in a wheelchair, stayed 8 months, got worse. I walked into the Second Chance Foundation in a wheelchair. 6 weeks later, I'm standing." She sat down. Next, Thomas walked to the stand. No wheelchair, just his cane. He looked directly at Marcus Dalton in the gallery. "Marcus and I were business partners 25 years ago, until I discovered he was defrauding Medicare. I turned him in. He rebuilt his empire, and now he's trying to destroy the one person who actually helps people instead of billing them." Thomas turned to the board. "My son fired Miss Grant because he thought she was hurting me, but she was saving me. And the day he threw her out, I wanted to die. Not from the stroke, from the realization that we punish goodness because we don't recognize it." His voice cracked. "Don't make the same mistake." Then came Robert Walsh, 80 years old, Vietnam veteran. He walked to the podium unassisted. "Dalton's facility kept me 8 months, billed the VA $89,000. I left worse than I came." He pointed at Olivia. 6 weeks with her, free, and I'm walking. Patricia stood again. "Your Honor, I'd like to call one final witness." The doors opened. A woman in a business suit walked in. Professional, confident. "State your name for the record," Patricia said. "Rebecca Kim, former Director of Marketing for Dalton Health Systems." Dalton's face went white. Rebecca pulled out a folder. 3 weeks ago, I resigned. I couldn't stay silent anymore." She handed documents to the board. "These are internal emails from Mr. Dalton instructing his team to fabricate evidence against Miss Grant." She pulled out a USB drive. "This contains audio of Mr. Dalton explicitly saying, 'I don't care if the accusations are true. Kill the program. Destroy the girl.'" The room erupted. The board chair banged his gavel. "Order." Dalton's attorneys scrambled, whispered frantically. The board huddled for 15 minutes. When they returned, the chair's face was grim. "The complaint against the Second Chance Foundation is dismissed. Furthermore, we're referring this matter to the State Attorney General for criminal investigation." The room exploded with applause. Olivia collapsed into Leonard's arms, sobbing. But outside, in the parking lot, Leonard's phone rang. Alan's voice was panicked. "Sir, it's your father." He collapsed. "Ambulance is on the way." Leonard's world stopped. Leonard and Olivia ran through the hospital doors together. Thomas was in the ICU. Second stroke. Left side, paralyzed again. When they reached his room, he was agitated. Monitors beeping frantically. Nurses trying to hold him still. "Mr. Scott, you need to calm down." But Thomas fought them. His blood pressure spiked. 190 over 110. The doctor turned to Leonard. "We may need to sedate him." "No," Olivia said. She pushed past the nurses. "Let me through." She sat beside Thomas and took his right hand. the one he could still move. "Thomas, it's me. I'm here." His eyes found hers, wild, terrified. "You're safe," she whispered. "I'm not leaving." Slowly, so slowly, his breathing steadied. His grip loosened. The monitors started calming. Within 10 minutes, his blood pressure dropped to 145/90. The doctor stared at the monitors, stunned. "I've never seen anything like that." Olivia didn't let go of his hand. 3 days later, Thomas woke up. His left side was weak, weaker than before. The doctor said recovery would be slow, uncertain. But when Thomas looked at Olivia, he smiled. "Told you," he whispered. "Can't get rid of me that easy." Olivia's eyes filled. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." Deal. The news about Dalton broke nationally that week. Federal prosecutors filed charges: fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Marcus Dalton faced 20 years. His facilities were investigated. Hundreds of patients came forward with stories of unnecessary treatments, inflated bills, false hope sold for profit. Dalton health systems collapsed within months, and the Second Chance Foundation grew. 18 months later, the estate grounds were covered in white chairs, 200 guests, mostly foundation patients and their families. Olivia stood in the bridal suite, looking at herself in the mirror. Her dress was simple, elegant, real. A knock at the door. Thomas stepped in, wearing a tuxedo, leaning on his cane. "You look beautiful," he said. Olivia's eyes filled. "You're really going to do this?" "Walk you down the aisle." Thomas smiled. "I've been practicing." She crossed the room and hugged him, held on tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when no one else did. You gave me my life back, Olivia. This is the least I can do." The music started. Thomas extended his arm. Olivia took it, and together they walked down the aisle. Slow, steady, every step a miracle. Margaret Chen sat in the front row, wiping tears. Robert Walsh stood at attention. Dr. James Chen waited at the altar, his face full of love. Leonard stood beside James as best man. When Olivia passed, she met his eyes, and she smiled. Not the cautious smile of someone still healing, but the real smile of someone who'd forgiven. Leonard smiled back, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt whole. 5 years later, the Second Chance Foundation operated in 11 states, 200 therapists trained in Olivia's methods, thousands of patients given hope. Thomas volunteered 4 days a week, until the day he passed peacefully in his sleep at 82. His journal entry the night before he died read, "I lived through 2 strokes. Olivia gave me years I wasn't supposed to have. I walked her down the aisle. I saw my foundation change lives. I have no regrets. This is what grace looks like." The study where Leonard first watched the security footage, the room where everything changed, became a memorial. The walls were covered with photos, hundreds of patients holding signs, "Second chances are real." In the center, a framed image, Olivia holding Thomas after his first 6 steps, his face tilted back in gratitude, her arms supporting not just his body, but his hope. Beneath it, a plaque. The moment that changed everything. October 12th. Olivia stood there one afternoon, watching a new patient take her first steps in the therapy room next door. Leonard found her there. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She watched the woman stumble, then catch herself, watched her family cheer. "I'm thinking your father was right," Olivia said softly. "Legacy isn't what you build. It's who you help build themselves." Leonard stood beside her. "He'd be proud of you. He'd be proud of us." They watched together as another impossible thing became possible. Outside, in Thomas's garden, flowers bloomed in the afternoon sun. And somewhere in every person who'd learned to walk again, in every family reunited with hope, in every second chance given, Thomas's spirit lived on. Not in what he'd built, but in who he'd helped become whole.